IEC is briefing the media on the state of readiness ahead of the voter registration weekend. Let's take you live to that briefing now.
Will operate between 8 and 5 p.m. on both days. Opening of all registration stations this weekend provide equal opportunity to all South Africans to access the voter registration process. Registration weekends as a modality of registration provides us by far the greatest registration yields in comparison with other methods. Therefore, we approach this weekend with a measure of expectation that this weekend will once again provide us significant registration activity. The recently released Census 2022 results indicate that our population has grown to 62 million inhabitants, with an estimated 39.7 million voting age population. The voters' roll currently stands at 26.2 million, representing 66% of the estimated voting age population. We are approaching this registration weekend informed by the national imperative to increase the coverage of the voters' roll in all its dimensions. We pertinently wish to indicate that lease agreements pertaining to permanent voting stations have been signed and concluded. Of these voting stations, 62% are schools, 9.7% are places of worship, and the balance of 28% include all other categories such as community halls and other municipal infrastructure. There are a further 959 temporary voting stations across the country. The majority of temporary voting stations are found in the province of Gauteng at 204, followed by the Free State at 180 and Limpopo at 150. Procurement processes in relation to the provision of temporary infrastructure have also been concluded. The institutionalization of temporary stations ensure that electoral services reach communities which would otherwise not have the services available. They are therefore an important mechanism of extending franchise rights to all eligible citizens. Furthermore, there are 33 mobile voting stations across the country. 69,718 staff have been recruited and trained for this registration weekend. Out of this appointed staff, 53,028 are female and 16,690 are male. In addition, 35,640 registration staff are under the age of 35, whilst 26,000 are between the ages 36 and 50. The balance of 7,603 are 50 years and older. Currently, rather crucially, 50,213 of the total staff complement are unemployed persons. In other words, the Commission is giving working opportunities for young and unemployed persons. And this may be contrary to popular held belief. The voter management devices are the mainstay technology for the delivery of the registration process. The VMDs were first introduced in 2021 and have since undergone significant improvements based on the lessons that were evinced by the previous electoral events. Accordingly, the operating system for these devices has now been enhanced. Furthermore, 3 business applications will be running on these devices during this weekend. These are the staff attendance register, voting station monitoring, and the voter registration applications. The devices are designed to operate online via an access point network. However, all three applications have been coded to operate offline in a number of instances, including when there is insufficient connectivity with the central database. The interplay between the online and offline modes of the devices will happen without operator intervention. A dry run was conducted on 28th October to assess the functionality of the devices as well as the infrastructure that underpins its functionality. Again, optimizations have been effected in the light of the insights arising from the dry run exercise. The delivery of essential voter registration material, including VMDs, stationery packs, arrow signs, and document storage boxes have been provisioned and delivery completed across all provinces. Importantly, the registration process does not require the completion of forms at the station, and therefore limited time will be spent at the station for actual registration. The voters' roll, as it existed at the beginning of October, has been printed and delivered to all municipalities. Approximately 260 tons of equipment and material has been handled through our logistics value chain. Since the Commission launched the online registration portal in July 2021, a total of 1.1 million registration transactions have been recorded. The portal has experienced a hive of activity this year, with 52% of all transactions being recorded in the 11 months of the year. New registrations amount to 40.6% of the total online registration activity. Once again, women are the majority users of the online portal at 56%. Young persons under the age of 29 indicate a strong usage level at 49.6%. We have noted pronouncements of arrangements by the Department of Home Affairs to open its offices last weekend as well on this weekend to allow citizens to collect identity documents as well as get replacement IDs, including temporary identification certificates. These offices will be open between 8 and 5 on both days on the weekend. We thank the department for affording eligible citizens the maximum opportunity to enlist on the voters' roll. The Electoral Commission makes an impassioned call on all other South Africans to seize the moment by registering as voters. Only those who are on the voters' roll can have a say in the electoral outcomes next year. Even if you have not as yet decided to vote, it is still important to be on the voters' roll because your choice can only be recorded if you are registered. Therefore, by not registering, essentially you lose your voice. Importantly, the Commission encourages registered voters to check the correctness of their details by visiting registration stations over the weekend. This is crucial because with the amendment to prescripts, voters may only vote in the voting district in which they are registered. Deviation from this general rule is only available on pre-notification to the Chief Electoral Officer by a date to be regulated in terms of the election timetable. Our contact center has been activated and can be reached on 0800 11 8000. The web chat on our website has received considerable number of visitors and closely followed by our WhatsApp chat. So join the community of citizens who need more information to register by sending hi on our WhatsApp line, which is 0600 88 0000. It is your democracy. Own it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, CEO. Definitely this weekend, it's your democracy. Own it. I'm going to open the floor for questions of clarity or any other issues. Please introduce yourself and then pose the question.
Thank you very much. My name is Yana Mo from Newsroom Africa. Mine is just a logistical question. So from your existing voting stations, just the close to 24,000, I'm sure by now you know which ones are the problematic ones in terms of signal or safety. What is the level of engagement with stakeholders like the police? Which areas are hotspots? And, maybe cell phone networks in terms of temporary cell phone towers. Are those some of the arrangements that have been put in place? Because we know, yes, CEO, you're talking about the voter management devices, the software being updated, but we experienced those challenges in 2021. So what are the other mitigating factors that have been taken into consideration? Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. It's Natasha Puri here from SABC News. Just as a follow-up to Zianda's question, I mean, we see this in previous times where we have service delivery protests close to voting stations. Has the IEC engaged with police, perhaps, to beef up security around those voting stations? Mr. Malabolo, you mentioned the temporary voting stations. Is this outside of the 23,292, correct me if I'm wrong, voting stations that will be open this weekend? Furthermore, you mentioned the issue of conducting a dry run on the weekend of the 28th of October. I know that the IEC had experienced some challenges with the voter management devices. What other challenges have you experienced, and can you assure us South Africans that those challenges won't come up again? And perhaps the issue of load shedding, do you think that will be an issue for the IEC? Have there been contingency measures put in place, like getting
Yeah. So that's it.
You know what I'm trying to say. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Ceci. Zianda, you want to make a follow-up?
Yes, sorry. Just a question of clarification. What precipitates the need to have a temporary voting station? And in terms of the infrastructure of these temporary voting stations, will it be exactly the same? Just for clarity.
Thank you very much. Let me allow this CEO. Let me take one more question before we do the last round. Thank you, Daddy.
All right, thank you so much. My name is Mulukumlo. I think CEO says that because of the changes with regard to the prescripts, voters will only be allowed to cast their vote in the voting district they are registered at. I think over the past years or electoral cycles, one would be registered in one province and they would be allowed to vote in another. The only difference, I suppose, was that they would not be given the provincial ballot if they are voting in another province. If you can just clarify here, what informs this particular decision? Do you not therefore think that for reasons beyond other people's control, somebody who find themselves in the Eastern Cape and they are registered here, you are denying them that opportunity to cast their vote fully? What informed these changes in the law?
Thank you very much. Let's pause on that note. May I allow the CEO and the team to respond to the questions. CEO.
No, thank you very much. The issue around disruptions at registration stations, of course, within the auspices of the NetJoint, there's a priority committee of all security role players that has been established. And the responsibility of that priority committee is to look at the security of the electoral process from beginning to end. And plans have been done and agreed at that level. So it is our expectation as the Commission that the plans that have been agreed with the security establishment will be such that there are no disruptions. Cell phone networks, indeed, we are working with partners within the telecoms industry to ensure that the infrastructure that we require to make the process seamless is effective. But should, for any reason, be a disruption to connectivity, that should not affect our operations, because the voter management device will then operate in an offline mode. And when we are offline, it doesn't mean we cease operations. We only mean that there are no active transmissions of transactions at that point. So the VMD will continue to operate in an offline mode, and at the point where it reconnects to the central database via the APN, at that point it will transmit the data into our database. So the configuration of the applications and the device are such that in an offline mode, operations will continue. No one has to wait at the station because the VMD is operating offline. Offline merely means it's recording the transactions on the local machine. What informs the need for temporary voting stations? Of course, South Africa remains a country of uneven development. There are sections of our settlements which are endowed with world-class facilities, and we are going to be using those. But there are also sections of our society where there's a dearth of public amenities, such as community halls, schools, and so on. Yet the people resident in those types of settlement are also entitled the registration process. They are also entitled the franchise right. So temporary voting stations are created to facilitate the franchise of people living in those types of communities. The dry run issues. The dry run has been a very strategic investment that the Commission has made, because absent the dry run, there would have been issues that may have arisen on registration weekend. But because of the dry run, we're able to identify those issues and take mitigation measures. Some of the issues that emerged was the transfer of transactions into the database. Optimizations have now been done, and that process is resolved. Similarly, there was an issue with our metro line between ourselves and Telecom, but again, it was an infrastructure issue. Routers had to be replaced. So there were very important lessons on the infrastructure side as well as on the software coding side that we've identified, and those have since been rectified. Load shedding is an issue of concern always, because it affects our business operations. However, on this occasion, we won't be so much reliant on the day on energy supply, because the VMDs will be pre-charged, and in a full battery charge, they should be able to carry the day without necessity for energy connections. Of course, the situation gets slightly more complicated for election day, but we'll deal with that in due course. For now, we are comfortable that the VMDs, if fully charged, they should be in a position to carry the operation for the day. Section 24A has been amended by Parliament, so it's a statutory matter. Why was it done? To fortify the credibility of the process. If you recall, there were allegations in 2019 of people having voted multiple times, having gone to their station and having received a Section 24A elsewhere. Those were allegations. The relevant people were arrested and brought before the courts. And in all instances, they indicated that they only attempted to do so. And some of them paid fines to the courts. Now, you don't want a repeat of that. Hence, Parliament felt it's necessary to strengthen the provision. It is still available. It's an available facility, but you're going to access that facility by pre-notification. In other words, you can't just rock on the day. You must have notified the Chief Electoral Officer through a mechanism that we will outline a little later on, of your intention to vote outside of your voting station. So it is not a facility that is taken away. It is only availed on pre-notification.
Thank you so much, CEO. I've got a question from our province, IEC in Limpopo province. They're holding a media training. There's a question here from Mukurubu Media. How are you ensuring that minority groups and marginalized communities are adequately reached and encouraged to register?
Yes, we have over 4,000 democracy education facilitators on the ground in all municipalities. Part of their responsibility is to engage with all communities through community workshops. And they are currently involved in a myriad of sessions with the marginalized groups, with women groups, with youth groups, and so on. So, and their task is to ensure that people are given the information they need to enable them to participate in the registration process and eventually in the election itself later on next year.
Thank you so much, CEO. The other one from the Eyewitness News, Tabisa Goba, is asking, can the Commissioner please respond to accusations from the EFF and ATM that the IEC usually hires staff from SATU?
Well, the IEC has no policy to hire members of SATU. No such policy exists in the IEC. What the IEC has instead done, it has elaborated and agreed a recruitment and selection criteria with political parties. Now, the party that you mentioned has been part of those discussions, and that agreement has been reached. Now, beyond the availability and the agreement on the recruitment and selection criteria, all staff who will be working at the voting station this weekend have been taken to local party liaison committees, so that if any party has a grievance against any person on those lists, they could raise an objection. And if a meritorious objection is raised, those people are removed. So that's really how open and transparent the recruitment process has been. That's one side of the equation. There's also a need to maintain a modicum of management experience within the ages of a voting station, because you can't just have unemployed people in a voting station with no management experience. In as much as you can't only have people with management experience. So it's neither this or this. It's actually finding a judicious balance between people with appropriate management skills and experience on the one hand, as well as giving opportunities for young people to gain experience. And the selection and recruitment criteria addresses that, or attempts to find that balance between those two imperatives.
Thank you. Thank you very much, CEO. Let me take the last round of questions before we close. Let me start with Lucy and then proceed to the other colleagues. Introduce yourself and then pose the question.
Thank you very much. Musi Chimondo from the SABC. I think you've touched a little bit on what I wanted to ask. I wanted to find out what are some of the conversations that have been had in the party liaison committee. You have touched on the whole issue in terms of SAT2, but what are the broader issues that you are also talking about? Because you're talking about the fact that you want more people to register, and on some level political parties have a responsibility to make sure that also happens. That's my first question. My second question has to do with the embassies voting abroad. What we're seeing this weekend is going to be replicated across the globe in other countries. And the other thing is we've had a lot of very unpredictable weather. In terms of the weather this weekend, are you prepared for any eventuality? Obviously, you can't predict the weather, but you have. Do you have any ways of contingency? Those are my questions.
Is there any other question before we respond?
My name is Norman Nosomweni from City Press. You spoke about the activities on the online registration portal. And now, in terms of based on what we have been doing and the expectations for this weekend, in terms of the attendance, obviously considering the weather and other elements, are you expecting, what is your expectation in terms of the numbers of people that can maybe turn out, and also the other element of young voters? Because it has always been a problem that you have young voters who have shown less interest in participating for the elections. Have you done enough to lure them to come and register this weekend? Maybe last question is this going to be the only voters registration weekend, or you will have another one, and how many do you hope to have before the elections? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, Ceci.
That was a photo from Kaya 959. CEO, in terms of when you launched the elections, you made it very clear that one of your mandates as the IEC is voter education. And I guess this just goes at the back of my colleague's question in terms of getting more young voters. What have the programs of the voter education process looked like so far? And are you happy with where you are right now with that?
On that note, let me allow the CEO, I don't see any other hand, let me allow the CEO to tackle the issues being raised. Thank you very much, CEO.
Thank you. The conversations in the PLC really, perhaps we must provide the conceptual framework of what the PLC is. The PLC is a consultative body of political parties who bear representation in legislative assemblies. It's available at the national, provincial, and municipal level. Now, its role is not to make determinations about the electoral process. That is vested in the Commission. But the role of the PLC is to advise the Commission so that the Commission can take factors that the PLC raises into account when they finally make determinations. Now, the issues that are before the PLC include, amongst others, the recruitment and selection and recruitment criteria that I spoke about. It involves looking at the list of voting stations to look at the appropriateness of the location of a voting station vis-a-vis the boundary of a voting district, is to look at suggested presiding officers, and in fact, if they feel that a presiding officer has a high political profile in a particular locality, then they can raise an objection. But the PLC also discusses proposed regulations and other legislation. For instance, the regulations that went through the public consultations, they were also presented to the PLC to air its views so that when the Commission finally makes the determinations, it could take into account the views of the Party Liaison Committee. But the PLC also plays a very important conflict management role. When there are inter-party conflicts in particular localities, we find that the local members of the PLC facilitate the resolution of conflicts that happen. So it's an important cog in the conduct of election. It's a structure that we value as the IEC because there's a lot of experience that is embodied in some of the members of the PLC. And we think we need to keep it. And in fact, most countries come here to benchmark about the operations of the PLC, and it's been replicated in many other jurisdictions. There will be a registration weekend at the embassies on the day to which the Commission will announce to give South African citizens abroad an opportunity to enlist on the roll and to record their votes when an opportunity comes. But beyond that, there will also be an online facility availed to South African citizens who are abroad. So both those modalities of registrations will be availed to South African citizens who are abroad. The weather, it's a tough one because our weather patterns are quite unpredictable. We are looking at the weather predictions, and we hope for a less than inclement weather over the next few days, so that it is warm enough, everybody doesn't have hurdles to get to the voting stations. In terms of the emergency situations, of course, we, as part of the priority committees, which are also established at the provincial level, the provincial disaster management is involved to assist in the event disasters arise. The numbers, what do we expect by way of the numbers this weekend? Let's say this, we've built capacity to register the entirety of the 39 million people who are eligible. So we have the capacity, infrastructure-wise, human capacity-wise, to deal with everybody that comes up. But we've got to be realistic because our registration framework is not compulsory. It's a voluntary system. So I think the Commission would be happy to enlist an additional 1 million people on the voters' roll. Young voters, we have been working hard to lure, to use your words, to lure young people and enthuse them sufficiently to register to vote. Some of the activities that we've been engaged in include the Schools Democracy Week, where we went to schools in the month of April and subsequent weeks to engage with young persons within the formal schooling system on the need to register and really engaging them about civic and democracy education. We also had a program of visiting all universities, technicons, and TVET colleges, again, to engage young people with the civic and democracy education content and to register young people within those tertiary institutions. I indicated that we have close to 4,000 people on the ground, democracy education facilitators, who are also engaging with young persons. We've set up the voter registration portal in part to ensure that there's a facility for young people to register using their mobile devices, because the mode of communication for young people is through mobile devices. So they engage politically, they engage socially on mobile devices. And therefore, there's a voter registration portal which is available on mobile devices, precisely because we wanted to create a modality close to what young people use for purposes of registration. Is this the only registration weekend? The Commission has already announced that there will be another yet. Our focus is to make this one as successful as it should be, because there's a huge public investment that the country is making, and it has to be a fruitful exercise.
So I've got the last question from my online troopy here. How is the delay in the delivery of judgment affecting preparations?
Well, the attitude of the Commission is that the court must be given the space to look at all the issues and announce the judgment, hand down the judgment at an appropriate point. But of course, the longer it takes, it creates a level of uncertainty in terms of the finalizing systems. For instance, the number of signatures, the module that we created for that purpose has to be finalized. And it has to be finalized on a certain figure that is pronounced on by the Constitutional Court.
Thank you so much, CEO. Looks like we have covered all the key questions. The statement is available online. All our platforms are available to South Africans. You Google us, you find us everywhere, on WhatsApp, on contact center, on Facebook, Twitter. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, it's been a great start to voter registration weekend coming ahead. We're going out in our numbers. The CEO has given us a number. I'm hoping that we'll beat his number. He's sitting at 1 million.
Right, we come out of that where the CEO of the Independent Electoral Commission has been, of course, giving that media briefing ahead of the voter registration weekend, a big weekend, of course, the 18th and 19th of November this weekend. 39 million South Africans can go out to register to vote, or at the very least, check with your voting station where you are registered. Some of these issues that have come up, particularly important, and one of the issues that Mr. Mamabolo speaks about at the end there is, obviously he says they have the capacity to process 39 million registrations, but they are expecting or hoping that even if they could add 1 million people to the electorate, new voters to the electorate, that would be a good feat in this voter registration weekend. Some concerns naturally raised by the media around what the weather would look like this weekend, as they hope that the many South Africans will be coming out to register to vote. The CEO there saying that they are, of course, in contact with provincial management departments, provincial disaster management in all the various provinces. And I think a lot of those fears, of course, coming out of that hailstorm that we saw on Wednesday, some issues, of course, that needed to be clarified about where some groupings may need to go and register. For instance, if you are living abroad, the CEO highlighting that you may in fact register online, and that is why they have created this online registration platform, and not just for those that are registering abroad, but for young people as well that would prefer to just use some of their mobile devices to check if they're registered and how they're registered to vote. There was an earlier issue around a little bit of legislation, right? Section 24A of the Electoral Act. One of the journalists essentially asking just the constitutionality, really, of not being given a provincial ballot paper if you are not in the province where you previously perhaps may reside or come from. And of course, the explanation there that we heard from the CEO is that, well, if you are not in the province that you are registered with on the day that you vote, then you will not be given a provincial ballot paper, he says. And the reason why that is because back in the 2019 elections, there were many allegations of people that were double dipping and voting in various provinces on the day of election, and so they had to make that provision. But it does not mean that if you don't reside in or if you're not in the province where you reside, that you cannot vote. Instead, he says you can go onto the online platform to then inform the IEC where you will be voting from, so that you are able to then exercise your full vote. And I think as a woman, I want to take advantage of this one, where the CEO has said that 58% of registrars so far have been women. So I think a challenge there. Certainly to some of our gentlemen to take up the call to register and vote and have their voice in the 2024 elections.